am Wayne. Just welcome to my ambulance conversion. I have Wi-Fi relay boards, Bluetooth relay boards, voltage converters.
A fire protection district outside Chicago put a diesel ambulance up for public auction. 116,000 miles, aluminum box, everything still bolted in place. The opening bid was $1,650. A city in New Jersey listed a 90s Ford ambulance, and the first bid on it came in at $550. This happens every week, in every state, all year long, on government surplus websites anybody with a credit card can log into. And a small number of the people bidding are not collectors and not film crews. They are buying a place for somebody to sleep. 4 in the morning, gravel lot behind a Spokane church. 19 degrees, and there is ice on the inside of every windshield in that lot except one. Parked against the fence is a boxy white truck, taller than a van, squared off at the back, with faint rectangles on the side panels where decals used to be. Inside it, a 63-year-old Army veteran we will call Dale is asleep on a foam mattress over what used to be the gurney mount under 2 blankets, in a compartment sitting steady at 61 degrees. He paid $1,500 for the whole thing. It is his first winter since 2019 that he has not been cold. There are more people living this way than anybody counts. So let's go through it properly, including the parts that go badly. Start with the vehicle, because none of this makes sense until you know what an ambulance actually is. Strip off the light bar and the siren, and what remains is a small insulated aluminum room bolted to a heavy-duty truck chassis. That box was engineered to hold a stable temperature while a paramedic works on somebody in the back, which means there is real insulation packed inside the walls, and the floor is reinforced to carry weight that would flex the floor of an ordinary cargo van. Then, there is the electrical system, and this is the part that makes converters go quiet with respect. An ambulance idles for hours in a hospital bay running lights, radios, monitors, and a heater. So the factory builds it with an oversized alternator, sometimes 2, a bank of deep cycle batteries in the back, and a shore power inlet on the outside so the station can plug it into the wall overnight. Somebody converting a plain cargo van pays thousands of dollars and spends months of miserable weekends building all of that from nothing. On an ambulance, it is already there, wired, fused, and labeled. There is more. The outside compartments, the ones the crew used for backboards and oxygen bottles, have locking paddle handles and drain holes in the floor of them. That is dry outdoor storage for tools, water jugs, boots, and a spare battery that never has to come into the living space. There is a vent fan in the ceiling. There are grab handles on every wall, which matters far more than it sounds when the man living in there is 63 with a bad knee. So why is something like that selling for the price of a decent used refrigerator? Because fire districts and county services do not sell ambulances based on condition. They sell them on a schedule. A rig comes off the road at a set mileage or a set number of engine hours, a new one replaces it, and the old one goes onto an auction site. Which means the price has almost nothing to do with what is wrong with the truck. That cuts both ways. And we will come back to it, because it is where most of these stories end badly. The people who buy these well know exactly what they are looking at before they bid. Odometer mileage on an ambulance lies, because these vehicles spend enormous stretches parked and idling, so the engine hour meter tells the truth, and a rig with low miles and 4,000 hours has effectively done 120,000 more. They want a diesel on a heavy chassis rather than a gas engine on a light one, because the light chassis rigs are the ones that were run hard on short city calls. They read the maintenance sheet the district posts with the listing, and they walk away from anything with a transmission service that got skipped. And they check whether the seller pulled the lights and the striping already or left that job to the buyer. Because that is a weekend of work and a bill either way. Now Dale, because the vehicle is not the story. He served in the Army in the 80s, then spent 26 years in freight, loading docks and dispatch, laid off at 58. Then his wife got sick, and the treatment took the savings, and then it took her anyway. Then the apartment went. He is exactly the profile of the fastest growing group of homeless people in this country, and it is not young men on drugs, whatever the news tells you. It is people over 55 with long work histories, wiped out by one medical event and a rent increase landing in the same year. Dale spent 3 years in a car and then a tent. Twice, everything he owned went into the back of a city truck during an encampment sweep, and one of those times it included his discharge paperwork. If you have ever tried to claim veterans' benefits without your DD-214, you know exactly what losing that piece of paper costs a man in time. Then a church group and a retired diesel mechanic put him in a decommissioned ambulance they had bought at auction and spent 2 months converting in a driveway. The conversion is less than people imagine, and that is the whole point. The gurney and the mounting rail came out, which took an afternoon and a grinder. The medication cabinet on the driver's side wall stayed because it is a perfectly good cupboard with a latch that holds at highway speed. A sheet of plywood went over the gurney rail bolts to make a flat platform, and a foam mattress went on top of that, up on slats. The mechanic pulled the light bar off the roof and patched the holes with marine sealant, took the striping off the side panels with a heat gun over 2 long evenings, and cut the wiring to the siren rather than just switching it off, because a disconnected siren is a defense and a switched off one is not. He mounted the diesel heater in an outside compartment, ran the fuel line to the vehicle's own tank, and cut one exhaust hole through the floor. He wired a small solar panel to the existing battery bank, which was easy because the battery bank and the charge wiring were already sitting there from the factory. Total spend on top of the $1,500, somewhere around $1,100, most of it the heater and the tires. So what does a day inside one actually look like? Dale's alarm is a standing arrangement rather than a clock. The church's maintenance man arrives at 6:30 and Dale is gone by 7:30 every day without being asked twice. That is the entire deal, and it is the first rule anybody living in a vehicle learns. You leave before you are noticed because getting noticed is what starts the paperwork that ends with your home on the back of a tow truck. Water rides in 2 5-gallon jugs in the outside compartment, filled at a spigot behind a hardware store where the owner told him plainly that he does not mind as long as nobody else finds out. Washing is the harder problem, and the answer for most people in vehicles turns out to be a gym membership. $20-odd a month buys a hot shower every morning in a heated building with a locking door, and people who have lived in tents will tell you it is the single most valuable subscription in their life. Breakfast happens on a fold-down shelf with a butane burner and the back doors cracked 6 inches for air. Then the middle of the day is errands that take 4 times longer than they should. The VA appointment across town, the pharmacy, the county office that closes at 4. But the phone charges off the alternator while he drives because an ambulance was built to power a cardiac monitor and a phone is nothing. So he is not the man in the library chair waiting 2 hours on a wall outlet. And he does not have to choose between the appointment and guarding what he owns, because what he owns is behind a locked steel door in a parking lot he can see from the waiting room window. Which brings us to the night, because a December night in eastern Washington sits in the teens for 10 hours straight, and this is where the box either earns the money or kills somebody. What kills people outside is almost never dramatic cold. It is wet clothes, wind, and a long night. Inside the aluminum box, with factory insulation in the walls and one human body, the temperature already runs well above the outside air. At 19 degrees, that is still not enough. So the heat comes from a diesel air heater about the size of a shoebox, mounted under the floor, drawing fuel straight from the vehicle's own tank and venting its exhaust outside through a pipe under the chassis. It blows dry, warm air into the cabin and it sips fuel, running most of the night on well under a gallon. 10 years ago, a unit like that was expensive. Now it is one of the cheapest things in the entire build, and it is the single reason a person can survive a real winter in a metal box instead of just enduring one. The heater is also where people die, so this is the part to pay attention to. The lethal danger inside any small sealed vehicle is carbon monoxide. It has no smell, it makes you sleepy before it makes you sick, and it does not care about your intentions. People who do this properly run a vented heater and never an open propane burner overnight. They mount one carbon monoxide alarm at head height and a second one low. They crack the roof vent even when it is freezing. They crawl under the truck and check the exhaust pipe for rust and damage. Every winter, somebody skips one of those steps and does not wake up. The other night problem is water, and it is the one nobody expects. Every breath you exhale puts moisture into the air, and in a sealed aluminum box, that moisture condenses on the cold walls and drips back onto your bedding by morning. Wet bedding in February is how a warm night turns into a dangerous week. So the vent stays cracked, the diesel heater runs dry heat instead of a flame in the room, and the mattress sits on slats so air can move underneath it. And then there is a $2 barrel bolt on the inside of the rear doors, which might be the most important part of the whole vehicle. Because here is what years of sleeping outside does to a person. You never fully sleep. Some part of your brain stays posted at the door all night listening to footsteps, because tents get cut open and sleeping people get robbed and sometimes worse. Memory goes. Temper goes short. Days blur into each other. Then put that same person behind hard walls, a steel door, and a lock, and the first thing they say, over and over, in every one of these stories, is the same two words. I slept. That is the whole miracle. And everything that comes after homelessness starts there. Because nobody fills out benefits paperwork, holds a job interview, or keeps track of a housing wait list on 4 broken hours a night. If this is landing close to home for you, there is probably a reason. I put together a guide called The Veteran's Blueprint. It covers the things that need more room than a video gives them. What to do in the 72 hours before you lose an apartment, which is the window where almost everything is still fixable. Which documents to protect first, and how to replace the ones already gone. How to get in front of a caseworker instead of onto a list. And for the people watching who are not in trouble themselves, what to actually do for somebody who is. The link is the first one in the description. Go get it after this video. Now back to the lot, because there is a legal wall around all of this, and it stops most people before they ever spend a night inside. You cannot drive around in something that still looks like an ambulance. Before a private buyer takes ownership, it has to be decommissioned. The red and blue lights come off, the siren gets pulled, the striping and lettering come off the panels. Impersonating an emergency vehicle is a serious charge in every state, and it is the fastest way to turn a cheap shelter into a court date. That is why these rigs end up looking like plain white box trucks with ghost outlines where the words used to be. The harder part is paperwork. An ambulance is titled as a commercial truck, and getting sensible private insurance on a commercial truck you live in ranges from expensive to impossible. So builders retitle it as a motorhome, which generally means installing a permanent bed, a place to cook, water storage, and heat, then taking it to a state inspection. Get through that and you are a driver with a legal vehicle instead of a homeless person in a suspicious truck. Skip it, and every traffic stop is a coin flip. The people who do this well spend their first month on paperwork instead of on decorating, And then there is the 2 in the morning knock, and every person in this life knows that sound on a steel door. Sometimes it is an officer, tired and polite, saying a business owner called. Sometimes it is a parks employee at dawn. And sometimes, uniquely for these vehicles, it is a well-meaning stranger who saw an ambulance parked on a residential street at midnight and called 911 because they assumed somebody nearby was dying. The law is harder on a vehicle than on a tent in one specific way, and this is the honest downside of the whole approach. A tent cannot be towed, an ambulance can. Most cities have oversized vehicle ordinances banning anything over a certain height or length from parking on the street overnight, and many have habitation ordinances that make sleeping in your own legally registered vehicle a citable offense. Get a ticket you cannot pay and it becomes a warrant. Let the registration lapse and the rig gets tagged, then towed, then parked in an impound lot collecting storage fees that double every week until it goes to auction. And then a man who had a home with a lock on it has nothing at all faster than he lost the apartment. In June of 2024, the Supreme Court's decision in the Grants Pass case gave cities much wider power to ticket and arrest people for sleeping outside, even where there are no shelter beds available. Cities across the West answered with new bans and bigger sweeps. In that climate, the wheels under an ambulance became both the entire advantage and the entire vulnerability. You can move before the sweep comes, but you have to keep that thing legal, insured, and running, or it turns into the most expensive mistake of your life, which is where that cheap auction price comes back around. A $1,500 rig is $1,500 because the transmission is tired, and a transmission on a heavy chassis is a $4,000 problem that arrives with no warning. A diesel ambulance gets somewhere around 8 to 12 miles per gallon, so every move across town costs real money. There are people who bought one of these, spent everything they had on it, and ended up worse off than when they started, sleeping in a dead truck in the overflow lot of a tow yard. There is no toilet and no shower either. No plumbing at all in most of them, just jugs and a bucket system nobody wants to discuss on camera. And housing advocates raise a concern that deserves taking seriously. If the public gets used to seeing homeless people tucked neatly into converted vehicles in a gated lot, the pressure to actually build housing quietly evaporates and the emergency measure becomes the permanent plan. Nobody serious, including the mechanics doing the converting, calls this a solution. They call it a bridge. And the argument for a bridge is blunt. Permanent housing takes years. Winter takes one night. There is one more thing, and the people who fund these programs never predict it in the budget. In a lot of cities, there are now safe parking programs where a church or a nonprofit or the city itself opens a lot at night for people living in vehicles. Santa Barbara has run one since 2004. Seattle, Denver, Portland, and dozens of smaller cities have their own. A gate that closes, a portable toilet, sometimes a shower trailer twice a week, sometimes a caseworker walking the rows on Tuesdays. What happens inside those lots is the thing nobody costed out. A retired diesel mechanic in Ohio who bought 2 old ambulances at auction, converted them in his own driveway and gave them both away, says the vehicles turned out to be the easy part and the lot was the medicine. Somebody has jumper cables. Somebody knows which clinic will not ask for an address. Somebody watches your rig while you take the bus to an interview. A woman parked 3 spaces down notices your doors have not opened by noon and comes and knocks. 8 rigs behind a chain-link fence is not a parking lot. It is the first neighborhood some of these people have had in years, which is roughly how Dale's year went. His paperwork lives in a sealed tub in the outside compartment now, off the floor and dry. His medication stays where he left it. And his brain, finally getting 7 hours, started working again. Inside 12 months, he had replaced his discharge papers, gotten into a VA housing program, and stayed on top of the waitlist, mostly because he had somewhere to keep the letters and a phone that stayed charged. The people who build these things have a saying that holds the whole idea in one line. Nobody climbs out of a hole while they are still falling. The rig does not lift anybody out. It stops the fall, and the man does the rest. So tomorrow morning in that gravel lot in Spokane, the ice will be back on every windshield except one. Dale will slide a $2 bolt, push a steel door open into 19-degree air with coffee he made himself, and drive his home 3 miles across town before the maintenance guy arrives, the way he does every single day. It is a small life held together with paperwork and a shoebox heater. It is also, for the first time in 6 years, a life he is actually awake for. If any part of this felt close to home for you or for somebody you love, the Veteran's Blueprint is the first link in the description. Go get it before you close this video. It is the most useful thing I know how to hand you. And if stories like this one matter to you, stories about ordinary people quietly refusing to give up on each other, subscribe. There are far more of them out there than the news will ever bother to tell you.